There was a time in America when one sentence could end any argument about quality. It did not matter whether you were talking about a wristwatch, a hotel, a racehorse, or a meal. If something was the finest of its kind, the absolute best that money and craftsmanship could produce, an American in the 1930s had a single phrase ready. They would simply say, "It's a Duesenberg." The name had escaped the car. It had become the word for perfection itself. And that is a strange and powerful thing for a machine to achieve, because the company that built those cars existed for barely 2 decades, and by 1937, it was gone. This is the story of the last Duesenberg ever built, and of how a name became more permanent than the company that created it. To understand the ending, you first have to understand how high this car once stood. The Duesenberg Automobile and Motors Company was founded in 1913 by 2 brothers, Fred and August Duesenberg. They were largely self-taught engineers, and they were brilliant ones. Duesenberg built racing engines and race cars that won at the highest level, including victory at the Indianapolis 500 and a Grand Prix win in Europe. But the car that made the name immortal arrived at the end of the 1920s. It was called the Model J. When the Model J was introduced at the New York Salon for the 1929 model year, it was not simply a good luxury car. It was built deliberately to be the finest automobile in the world, and on paper, it genuinely was. Its engine was a massive straight 8 cylinders in a line, displacing 420 cubic inches with dual overhead camshafts and 32 valves at a time when most cars had a fraction of that sophistication. It produced around 265 horsepower. To put that in context, when the Model J appeared, it was roughly twice as powerful as its closest American competitor, and it was priced to match. Duesenberg sold the Model J as a bare chassis with no body at all for around $8,500 because the company assumed correctly that a Duesenberg buyer would commission one of the great coach builders to create a unique body for the car. By the time a Model J was finished and clothed, it could cost in the region of $20,000 to $25,000. In the middle of the Great Depression, that was the price of several comfortable houses. So the Duesenberg Model J became the car of a very particular kind of customer. It was owned by Hollywood royalty, by Gary Cooper and Clark Gable. It was owned by industrialists, by tycoons, by heads of state and European nobility. The advertising for the car was famously confident. One campaign showed nothing but a simple sketch of a wealthy man and 3 words: "He drives a Duesenberg." No picture of the car, no list of features. The company understood that the name now did the work. But the very things that made the Duesenberg magnificent also made it fragile. A car this expensive depended entirely on the existence of customers wealthy enough and confident enough to buy it. And in October 1929, just as the Model J was reaching the market, the American stock market collapsed and the country fell into the Great Depression. The ultra-luxury car was, by definition, the most vulnerable product in the entire economy. Duesenberg survived longer than you might expect. There were still rich people in the 1930s, and the car was so desirable that it kept selling in small numbers. But the market was shrinking year after year, and there was a deeper problem inside the company. Duesenberg was not an independent company. It was part of an industrial empire controlled by a financier named Erich Laban Cord, the Cord Empire, which also included the Auburn and Cord automobile brands and a range of other businesses. The Model J had been created under Cord's ownership, and for a while, the arrangement worked. But the Model J, brilliant as it was not being fundamentally updated, and in 1932, the company suffered a profound loss. Fred Duesenberg, one of the 2 founding brothers and the great engineering mind behind the cars, was injured in a car accident and died from his injuries. The driving force behind the engineering was gone. By the mid-1930s, the Model J, for all its prestige, was an aging design. To keep the Duesenberg name competitive would have required an entirely new car, new engineering, new development, an enormous investment of money and time. And the man who would have had to authorize that investment, E.L. Cord, was facing the collapse of his whole financial empire. In 1937, the Cord empire came apart. Cord withdrew his support, and without it, the Duesenberg Automobile and Motors Company simply could not continue. In 1937, after barely a decade of building the Model J, Duesenberg stopped. The last cars were sold. The company that built the finest automobile in America closed its doors. And here's where the story takes a turn that almost no one expects. You would assume that 1937 was the end, that the last Duesenberg was simply the last car sold before the doors closed. The final car sold by Duesenberg as a working manufacturer was indeed a 1937 Model J, a magnificent machine shown at the New York Auto Show. But it was not, in fact, the last Duesenberg ever built, because the Duesenberg name had one more car left in it, and the story of that final car is one of the strangest in automotive history. When the company collapsed, not everything was finished. There was a chassis, reportedly begun earlier as a factory demonstrator, that had been set aside, incomplete, as Duesenberg fell apart. And some years after the company had officially died, that leftover chassis found a buyer. The buyer was a man named Rudolf Bauer. Bauer was not an industrialist or a film star. He was an artist, a German-American abstract painter, a significant figure in the modern art world of his time. And Bauer wanted a Duesenberg. What happened next should not really have been possible. The Duesenberg company no longer existed, but the people did. Former Duesenberg engineers, the actual craftsmen who had built these cars, came together to assemble Bauer's car, and the work was carried out under the supervision of August Duesenberg himself, the surviving founding brother. In 1938, using the leftover chassis and the remaining stock of parts, they effectively built a brand new Duesenberg for a company that had already shut down. It was an act of craftsmanship, performed almost out of loyalty to the name. But the cars still had no body, and Bauer, being an artist, did not want an ordinary one. He intended for the chassis to be shipped to Germany, where it would receive custom coachwork built to his own avant-garde design. And then, history intervened in the most brutal way possible. Rudolf Bauer was arrested by the Nazi regime. The Nazis had declared modern abstract art to be degenerate, and Bauer, as a prominent abstract painter, was a target. With Bauer imprisoned and the Second World War beginning, the Duesenberg project simply stopped. The car sat, wrapped, preserved, and unfinished, waiting for an owner who was in a Nazi prison. Bauer was eventually released, and in 1939, he managed to escape to the United States. And only then, finally, could his car be completed. The body was built to Bauer's own design, and it was unlike any other Duesenberg ever made. Where other Model Js wore the elegant, formal coachwork of the great traditional houses, Bauer sketched something personal and modern. Cycle fenders, a sharply raked windshield, a dramatically streamlined profile. It was part luxury automobile and part rolling piece of modern art, designed by the man who would own it. The car was finally delivered in 1940, and that car, the Bauer Duesenberg, is generally regarded as the last Duesenberg ever completed, finished a full 3 years after the company that bore the name had ceased to exist. So what does it actually mean for a Marque to die? The Duesenberg company died in 1937. That is a clear, documented fact. The financial empire that owned it collapsed. The investment needed to save it never came, and the doors closed. By every ordinary measure, that should have been the end of Duesenberg, but it was not the end, and the Bauer car proves it. 3 years after the company was legally and financially dead, its former engineers, led by one of its founders, were still willing to come together and build one more car by hand. They did it not because there was a company demanding it, and not really for profit. They did it because the name still meant something to them and to the man who commissioned it. The mark had stopped, the identity had not. And that distinction is the whole point. A company is a legal and financial structure. It can collapse in an afternoon. But an identity, a reputation, a name that has come to stand for the highest possible standard, that is something else entirely. It lives in the minds of people, and it does not switch off when the accountants close the books. This is why, nearly a century later, the word Duesenberg still carries its full weight. The cars are among the most valuable and most revered automobiles on Earth. One short wheelbase supercharged Model J, once owned by Gary Cooper, sold at auction for around $22 million. And the phrase, "It's a Duesenberg," still survives in the language as a way of saying that something is simply the best. There is a quiet lesson in that, and it reaches well beyond automobiles. We tend to measure success by survival, by how long a company lasts, how long a business stays open, how many years a name stays on the door. But the Duesenberg story suggests a different and more demanding measure. Duesenberg the company was, by the standard of survival, almost a failure. It lasted barely 2 decades and then collapsed. Yet, Duesenberg the idea has lasted 100 years and shows no sign of fading. The brothers and the craftsmen did not build something that lasted. They built something so good that its name outlasted it, and that is a far rarer achievement. Duesenberg the company lasted barely 2 decades. Duesenberg the idea has lasted a century. The Marque died when its last car was finished, but the name had already become something the collapse could not touch, a permanent word for the highest possible standard. The deepest form of success is not building something that lasts. It is building something so good that its name outlives it. Before we close the door on this one, if you believe the great machines deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Timeless Treasures. Every week, we bring one more forgotten masterpiece back into the light, and there are far more of them waiting than you might think.